He came barreling out of the alley like a small comet. Knees scabbed, shirt stained with a smear of chocolate and lemonade, hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. The parking lot fell into a strange hush as the little boy ran straight toward the ring of motorcycles parked under the neon sign, spinning on tiny feet and flailing arms. "They stole my mother," he shouted, voice high and cracked. "They stole my mother." A woman pushing a stroller dropped her coffee. A man walking a dog froze mid-step. The bikers looked up from 100 different stories. The long face of a man who polished chrome with the same devotion he gave his garden. The woman with tattoos like an atlas of old scars. The young rider who still smelled faintly of engine oil and powdered sugar from the diner shift. They were a picture people painted in their heads when they wanted danger. Leather, chrome, scowls. None of that prepared them for the small, fierce thing that barreled at them like a proclamation. One of them, the oldest, with a silver braid and a voice like gravel, pushed off his helmet and leaned down until his lined face was level with the child's. "Why don't you tell us what happened, buddy?" he asked, gentle, like a hand on a skittish horse. "They were chasing," he said. "They took her. They took my mommy. She was crying. They put her in a van. Please." Like a match flaring, the story jumped from the boy's throat into the air. The biker's expressions shifted, each face a weather map of something unexpected, worry, memory, a flash of something tender that had nothing to do with engines. The leader's jaw clenched and then loosened. He kicked his leg out, sat back on his bike, and in a voice low as thunder said, "We're gonna find her." They split like a wolf pack, dispersing at a scent. Not all riders would have moved so fast. Not all riders would have heard the tremor in the boy's voice and believed the danger was real. But these riders had rules that weren't written on banners or carved into leather. Protect the ones who can't protect themselves. Do no harm unless harm is coming. The rest called them reckless. They called themselves family. "What's your name, kid?" asked the young rider, his voice oddly soft. "Tyrone," the boy panted. "Tyrone James. Tyrone James. You got a phone we can call?" He shook his head. "No battery." Mom's bag." The boy's eyes filled and he pressed his palms to his mouth. The oldest rider handed him a bottle of water and a napkin as if that could stitch the moment together. Water spilled on his fingers and seemed to ground him. One of the women riders, the one with the atlas of tattoos, looped a jacket around his shoulders. The jacket smelled like cedar and motor oil in winter. "Where did you last see them?" she asked. "Down by the old Fuller storage," Tyrone said. They were arguing. There were two men. One had a beard. They put her in a white van. Fuller storage. A line on an old map. The kind of place most people forgot until something made them remember. It was an hour from the diner, maybe less if the traffic gods were kind. The leader wasted no time. He started issuing orders clipped and sure, the way a captain calls headings on a rough sea. 2 bikes would cut across the highway. One would take the service roads. The rest would circle back to keep the kids safe. "Hey, little T," the young rider said. "You ride with us, yeah? We'll bring your mom back." Tyrone nodded with a force that made the jacket shift on his small shoulders. He climbed on the bike behind the youngest rider as if he'd done it 100 times, tight-armed around a waist built for a grown man. People around them murmured. Some crossed the street to keep watching. Others muttered that it was a bad idea, that bikers couldn't be trusted. The bikers only heard the engines hum and the young boys breathing behind them. They rode through a city that looked the same but felt different. The neon lights were edges now, the rain-slick asphalt a mirror. The wind hammered the boy against the rider. His small arms trembled, but his grip never loosened. The leader's bike took the front like a hand leading a prayer. They moved with a purpose that made traffic part like weather. Fuller Storage sat on the gray rim of town, a maze of corrugated metal and chain-linked dreams. The lot was a scatter of vans and RVs, the kind of place criminals and lost things found shelter. The bikers slowed and parked, then melted into groups to reconnoiter. One person moved on foot to scout the perimeter while another checked the license plates on a cluster of vans. Their eyes searched in quick, practiced sweeps, cataloging dents, noting tire tracks, listening for sounds that didn't fit. "We need to look for a white van with no logo," the woman with tattoos said to the leader. And the kid said 2 men. "Could be thieves. Could be worse." He nodded. He had been in worse. He had a memory that lived in the place where bad things were filed away. A child's cry, a cold courtroom, the hush of a person leaving without saying goodbye. It made him cold, and it made him certain. They found the van before they found the men. It was tucked behind a row of storage units, half hidden, doors shut tight. There was no logo. The license plate was a temporary paper tag taped inside the window. The leader approached the van slow, as if the world might shift at any moment. He knocked on the metal, once, twice, then stepped to the door handle and jerked. It opened. Inside, wrapped in a blanket and sitting on a stack of moving boxes, was a woman with a bruise swelling against her temple and mascara streaks like the tracks of a storm. She looked up when the leader leaned in, and her eyes widened in a mixture of disbelief and relief. At the sight of the child's face, she started to crumble, hands coming up as if to shield herself from tears. "Tyrone," she gasped. She ran to him, ignoring the biker's surprised flinch, scooping him under her arm, kissing his head like oxygen. The boy buried his face into her neck and sobbed until the sobs were soft and small. For a breath, everything was simple. Child and mother, a jacket held like an anchor. "We called the police," the young rider said, sliding carefully into the doorway of the van. He had a radio clipped to his vest and a demeanor that refused to let danger breathe. "We saw two men leave in a blue pickup. License plate ended in 42. We got people finding the route." The woman looked at them, a question in her gaze. She opened her mouth to speak and closed it. Her voice came out thin. "Thank you," she said. "I didn't know where else to go. I thought they'd take him. I thought." "You're safe now," said the woman with tattoos. "You're safe," she explained in disjointed breaths. She had been arguing with a landlord over unpaid rent when two men offered to help move some boxes to make it look like they had vacated. Something had gone wrong. There had been a shove. Someone had pulled her into the van, said they were taking her to meet a buyer for some things, promised they'd be back in an hour. The hour had been more like a day. She had been kept until the men got nervous. She talked fast, sentences like a string of lights flickering, because the adrenaline made memory jagged. The bikers listened. They were not law enforcement. They were rough in manners, but precise in action. They called a detective they kind of knew, an old favor, a couple beers once shared when the law and the road crossed, and the detective said they'd bring a squad to take statements. That was the part of the night that promised paperwork and yellow lines and interviews. For now, the immediate thing was to get mother and boy somewhere safe. They drove them to a diner, the same one they'd passed when they heard the boy scream. The diner was like a paper set in a movie. Checkered floor, steaming coffee, a jukebox that played songs like memories. The waitresses looked surprised, but then soft, because the sight of Tyrone curled against his mother's chest made the world feel salvageable. You could see the work fall out of the bikers' faces in slow relief. The leader sat in a booth and stared at his hands as if the night had stamped something into them. He was thinking of his own kid, grown now and miles away, and of the times he'd promised himself something different. The younger ones joked in low voices, trying to make the mother laugh, awkwardly but honest. The woman with tattoos drew a coffee for the mom and held the cup like a medal. "Are you going to press charges?" asked the young rider, voice a worry-bottled question. It wasn't that they wanted revenge. It was that they wanted the world to remember this wasn't an acceptable thing. She looked down at Tyrone, then at the bikers who hadn't flinched when they saw her bruise, and she shook her head slowly. "I can't," she said. "I can't go through that. I need my job. I need to keep him." They said they'd. One of the older bikers slid forward a napkin and set a strip of dollar bills on the table. "For the next week," he said. "Pay rent. We don't want you to worry about that now." "No," she said quickly, then looked again and let the relief show like sunlight through curtains. "I thank you." They sat for a long time, soaking coffee and warming from an adrenaline that refused to leave. The world outside the diner hummed with indifferent life, but inside a small bubble of light, a temporary family had formed. The bikers didn't talk about who was to blame or whether they should have involved the police earlier. They only made sure the mother and child were breathing together, fed, given a motel room for the night with a promise that someone would come by in the morning to help with daycare, with rides, with small kindnesses. They did not make a fuss. They simply made things less painful. Days later, the two men were found and arrested at a roadside motel after surveillance and a clerk's tip. There was a quiet trial that made a record in town. The mother testified when she was ready, and the men received sentences that allowed her to breathe again. It was not perfect, but it let them move forward. In the months that followed, the bikers kept helping in small ways. fixing a hinge, leaving envelopes, finding a part-time job that fit her schedule. Tyrone started school. He learned to patch a tire and to paint rocks he gave to his friends. At his 7th birthday, they had a small picnic and a lopsided cake. The leader watched the boy blow out the candles and felt his chest unclench. He thought about promises kept. He had helped a child and his mother find a path back to safety, and that, to him, was enough.